Okay, everybody, good afternoon. Thanks so much for being here. We're getting started. I'm so happy to see a full house here today. I have the pleasure to introduce Jenny. Dr. Jenny Jenkins is the Atkinson Chair of Early Child Development and Education at the University of Toronto. The Atkinson Center uses the best available scientific evidence to inform public discourse, public policy, and the professional learning of those who work with young children. Dr. Jenkins is internationally known for her research on the family processes that promote lifelong learning and mental health in young children. She runs the Kids, Families, Places Study, a birth cohort longitudinal study of 500 children. Their older siblings and parents followed into the middle childhood. She is a major contributor to the scientific literature on young children's development and has published several books, including Understanding Emotions. She is the recipient in 2018 of the Pickering Award for Outstanding Contributions to Developmental Psychology in Canada. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So thanks very much for coming. And I just want to talk to you about some ideas that a bunch of us have been working on. So this is a real effort. Whoops. How do I get rid of...
You're on the big screen behind there, and that's just a video conference.
Oh, okay. Got it. So this is where I should be pointing. Good. Okay. So this is a real effort in shared thinking. My whole lab and a very particular and fine collaborator in Mikhail Perlman and really everyone else are postdocs and students who have worked with me over the years, who I have really valued around this issue of shared thinking and how we think about it. So let me just, where does it come from? What are we thinking about? So let's think, we're thinking about from individual to shared goals. We're thinking about our evolutionary history. And Michael Tomasello, a wonderful developmental psychologist and evolutionary psychologist, is interested in this idea about how we have evolved in terms of our ability to think and what we can think about. So he starts by talking about individual intentionality, where goals are competitive across members of the species. Then he talks about joint intentionality, how it evolves to joint intentionality, which is the selective advantage by working together for joint short-term goals. So you might, be able to capture some bananas, get some bananas, and you might share those, but it's about short-term. And then we're up to collective intentionality, which is really what he's saying differentiates humans from other non-human primates. And those are long-term joint goals, and that's the basis of society, science, culture, and it's really about this ability for me to know what's in your mind and you to know what's in my mind, and us to plan and think together as a consequence of that. So here's this idea then, and we see it in very, very early childhood. So we see that pointing, that looking to the point. We see that mutuality between parents and children, between siblings with one another. We're talking about this reading and thinking about what's in the mind of the other person. And it's a turn-taking with a cognitive expansion. So it's going back and forth between what I'm thinking about and what you're thinking about. And there's an expansion on it because you're building on what I'm thinking about. So Tomasello refers to cooperation as the basis of this ability in humans. And what I want to talk about today is really how it builds these very early reciprocal interactions, build brain architecture, which allows the brain to develop properly, to really be able to partake of these kinds of interactions, and to lower the risk of mental health and to improve learning in kids. So what we're gonna think about is really in this very early period from 0 to 2 years old. It's the aspect of parenting which has been found to be the most important for learning and mental health in children. So, as Becky was saying, I've run this longitudinal study for many, many years now, looking at children's development within the context of their families. And a lot of what the data that I'm going to show you come from that longitudinal study, where we've tracked a target child from birth, their older sibling, and their two parents. And so we've looked at the dynamics in the family that build these kinds of interactions that we're talking about. So, and what I want to show to you is that this critical thing around how, and I'm going to show it to you for mothers and siblings and caregivers. It's not just about one relationship. It's not just about mothers and children. It's about this quality of relation within the relational environment around the kid. And and this has a critical role at 18 months in these academic outcomes at school entry. So academic achievement, receptive vocabulary, executive function, understanding others, being able to get into the minds of others, all of those outcomes. In our study, we look at lots of different things. We study socioeconomic status, we study maternal depression, we study violence, and we look at whether there's argument and violence in the family, negative emotion. And really, this business about shared thinking is what is critically important for the children's learning. It's not that those other things aren't important, but really a lot of it funnels through this ability of people to build on one another's mental states. So we see here the cumulative risk, which would be all those things that I've said about things like depression, low socioeconomic status, and that has its own impact on the ability of moms, kids, fathers to do this shared thinking, and all of that is then related to the child outcomes later on. Let me just show you, it's not just the mom. Let's think about oh no, sorry, this is a different slide. Okay, it's not just, it's these things operate contingently with one another. So let's take something like a biologically at-risk child. Those are kids with low birth weight, and then we have the other kids of high birth weight. Birth weight is known to impact brain development, particularly low birth weight, but it operates across the whole continuum of birth weight, of kids being at risk in their brain development if they're low birth weight. So here are these kids who are low, here are these kids who are high. And what we see is that even though they've got this biological vulnerability, when they are raised in an environment where there's a lot of this shared thinking, then the kid's language development is absolutely fine. So it's a compensatory, that shared thinking is then compensating for this biological vulnerability, okay? If you see this low shared thinking, those kids, their high birth weight, they're getting up there, they're doing okay, but the low birth weight really aren't. So the low birth weight plus the low shared thinking is really more problematic for this language development. Okay, this is a study not from me. This has just come out in Psychological Science. I thank Nina for this. She found this. And again, what this is describing is this role of this shared thinking in the brain development of the children. And this is the first study to show that there's this very specific relationship of this mind sharing, of this shared thinking, and how this relates to an area of the brain which is involved in language processing. So the study is that the kids were in an fMRI. There was a task where there were stories. They were aimed at natural language comprehension. They're looking at brain activation and how that's occurring. And then the kid has a speech recorder on them for 2 days at a weekend. So captured is everything that parents are saying to that child, okay? And anybody else who comes, who's around. So, yeah, we hope it's not things like, yeah. Okay. But captured is a lot of that. Okay, so they then do automatic, it's a, you'd think you don't transcribe anymore. This is just automatically coded, this turn taking in children. So what they look at, what they find is particularly important is not the words spoken, but the adult to child turn taking that goes on over this 2-day period, the number of times that they hit a ball and pass it back with respect to an idea, okay? And then what you see is that these conversational, number of conversational turns per hour is then related to this to activation in this language processing area, which is then related to the child's language score ability, their language ability score, okay? So this is really the first study showing us, okay, here's this turn taking, here it's doing something about this early brain development in the kids, and here it's related to these child language outcomes. It's not a correlational effect. So we have a number of studies now. I'll get onto them in the other outcome domains, but specifically in language learning, we have Sarah Landry, who's done a number of intervention studies showing that if you teach moms, you randomly assign mothers to these different conditions of you teach them how to do this turn taking and this expansion and this responsivity and sensitivity to the babies. And then you have a match time where they have time with somebody, but they're just talking about child development. And then what's the outcome of that? So for the moms, they're responding more contingently. There's more, I can't read that now. There's more of something else that's very good. and then their language is significantly higher in the intervention group. And their negative affect is significantly lower, okay? So it's not just a correlational effect. It's something about being able to train up these moms, and then that has this positive impact on the kids. So the idea of responsivity of parents to children has been 50 years in the making. So loads and loads of people have thought about it. It's built on the concept of parental sensitivity. And that idea, and that was Bowlby's idea, a beautiful idea from Bowlby about the protection of the young. So if mothers were more responsive to if parents, caregivers, were more responsive to the babies, that protected them from predation. That's where his idea comes from. So the literature for 50 years really paid attention to the emotional cues of young children and how it influenced the later emotionality of kids. So you've heard all about attachment. The idea is that there's this quality of relationship, and that has these beneficial effects on emotional outcomes in kids. It is very, very expensive. So it's hard to code. It takes a long time. It's a central concept to development, but it is so expensive to deal with and to get a good read on. So Mikhail and I, with that group of people that I showed you to start off with, have been thinking about it not as an emotional thing, not as a parental thing necessarily, but really anybody who's in that child's environment. So we're interested in this idea of cognitive responding, reading another's mind in a reciprocal and turn-taking way, thinking about their thoughts and goals. So it is not a protection idea. It's really an idea of stimulation and taking up that mind. So we found it relevant in the measures that we've developed, not only a parent to child, but siblings, and Mikhail has been heading up some work on childcare educators to try to get at the same construct. We measure it quickly, and the idea of this is really that if we can take this idea, people probably read that, some people will have read that book of Malcolm Gladwell's Blink, and the idea of that wonderful, the central idea is that, you know, psychologists can work on these constructs for 30 or 50 years, and you can finally do it very quickly because you have a really good idea about how it works. And so that's what we were trying to operationalize in this idea. Yes, it usually takes an hour. You have to do all this coding. Maybe we can get it down to just a couple of minutes. And then it might be useful to public health and the general population more. Okay, so what we did was a shared thinking task. It's a dyadic cooperation task. We get people to build a model that's challenging, and the reason for that is that it then elicits explicit explanations that we need to code it. And each person can only touch 2 colors. So you've got to do it together. It's a cooperation task. It's hard to do. You do it together, and you're talking. So we do 5 minutes of observation, and then it's 2 minutes to code. So it's what we call quick and dirty. So just quick. Yeah. I think an attachment person will find it dirty, but okay. So just a couple of the items to give you the flavor of what happens is they do this task, 5 minutes, 2 minutes to code. A person just observes the tape and then rates these items. And it would be things like, there are 11 of them, but I'm just going to read out a couple to you. So this person is sensitive to what his partner, what his or her partner knows and understands. This person is good at rephrasing what his or her partner doesn't understand. This person is good at picking up cues that are subtle or nonverbal. So I'm going to show you a tape. It's a very brief clip. And what I want you to take notice of is watch the mom. This is an example of a highly responsive mom. So watch what she's doing around what the child is initiating. Okay?
You see any more hearts? Good, okay. All kinds of them. Two blue ones. Now, let's see if you see any more here. Is there any more? A green heart. One yellow. Two yellow. Oh, lucky. Now, do you see any more circles, any more hearts? Oh, I like this one. Stars. Let's put the stars.
So what you're seeing there is that building on. You're seeing a mom who's paying attention to what the child's looking at, and she's building onto that as that child is doing more. She's expanding it, okay? So this relates, we found it relates to kids' vocabulary over time, to the development of theory of mind, their emotional, to lower emotional problems. It, of course, links to socioeconomic status in families. So we've really got then this shared thinking is a reliable and valid measure for looking at moms. I'm going to talk about dads in a second, siblings, and educators. Okay, so let's just think about some of the consequences of this. So one of them is about the older sibling shared thinking. And we're looking here at the development in theory of mind. So we take account of what the kids are doing at time one, and then we look at how they change over time in terms of their understanding of other people. And sibling size is the issue that we're looking at here, because sibling size is always related with less good outcomes in larger families. So what we're paying attention to here is in these small families, the kid's theory of mind just fine, is doing okay. In these larger families, we're seeing that when they have this really highly sensitive sibling right next to them, who builds on, who watches what they do, who helps them, who builds on what they do, then their theory of mind development is high. When you see the large family without that quality, so the next sibling to them is really not sensitive to them, then their theory of mind development is much lower. Okay, so that's a sibling. It's a sibling effect, a sibling interest, influence that we're interested in. So I've been working in families for 30 odd years, and one of the big problems is what we call the glop of family interaction. And that is that as a researcher, you have a family that doesn't work very well, and that occurs in all of the different people, and you don't know what's come from what. You've just got glop. So I've been interested in methods that try and pull apart this glop. So I'm gonna talk to you about a study around this idea of sensitivity and cognitive sensitivity that we've done across the whole family environment. So think about your own families. There's you, there's whoever your siblings are, there are whoever your two parents are. And so we have different levels of that family environment. We've got a whole family environment. We've got individuals, and they can both offer things to other people and elicit things from people. And I'll talk about that in a second. And then you've got lots of unique dyads, okay? And that's the glop that we're talking about. And one of the questions then is, where does this cognitive sensitivity, how does it display itself, and where does it come from, okay? And so what I want to know is, does it come from an individual person? Does it come from the total family environment? Is there something about the culture of a whole family? Or does it really happen just in these individual dyads within the family? That's where it builds up from. Oh, I always forget that this is animated. Okay. Imagine, don't look at the slide for a second. Imagine me. I am interacting with Katrina, Mikhail, and Earl. When I talk to each of them, do I carry with me the same effect across those people? Am I equally shared thinking with Katrina as I am with Mikhail? Does Earl, but not with Earl? So we're interested, that wasn't a specific example, but more just a, so what we're trying to get at is, do I carry the same thing across everybody that I interact with? Do I elicit the same thing from different people? So that's that's what's called my actor effect. If I do the same thing with Katrina, Mikhail, and Earl, that's my actor effect. And I think I'm going to skip over the partner and come on to thinking about dyads. So maybe it's all my sensitivity operates when I talk to Mikhail, who I know very well. So that's where it all is. It's not there with Katrina and Earl. It's just there with Mikhail. So there's something about that dyad that enables that to occur, but it doesn't occur with these other two people, okay? Just paresthempia, for example. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to isolate, where is all of this occurring? So one of my big questions, because we find this effect for siblings, we find this effect for parents, one of my big questions is, does something happen in a family environment where different dyads come to resemble one another? So if Mikhail and I interact like this, do we, over time, as Katrina watches us and as Earl watches us, do we, over time, do they learn from watching the two of us? So we're looking at this kind of spillover idea across a whole family, okay? So that was the main thing that we're interested in is here. Let's isolate what goes on in a dyad. Let's isolate what a person brings, and let's figure out if there's a whole family ethos which is building this skill in kids, okay? Okay, so this is Dylan Brown, who was here a couple of years ago. These are results from one of his papers. He looked at a mother and two children, so the mom and the older sib and the younger sib, when the younger sib was 3 years old. Okay, so it's just the beginning of this skill. And what he sees at that point is a very strong actor effect for the mom. So the moms behave very similarly to the two kids. The older has a little bit of an actor effect, and the younger has almost no actor effect. And what he also sees is, yeah, there's a little bit of an indication that something is going on in the family, and that's having the strongest effect on the younger kid. But it's there for the mom and for the older child. Then we look at them 4 years later, and we include fathers in that, and everybody is interacting with everybody else. Okay, so they're all interacting in pairs, and then we do all this fancy statistical stuff that pulls out this actor effect. Okay, so what happens then? So we see a development in what's going on. This actor effect is getting really big, okay? So people across the whole family are either sensitive with everyone or sensitive with no one. So they're either showing low levels of it or higher levels of it. And that is really become something that is intrinsic to a person, okay? They're carrying that around with them, that skill or ability. And it's explaining 20% of the variance. But there's also, after you've taken account of all these things to do with actors and dyads, you've also got this family effect. So you've got this, which is explaining about 10% of the variance, which is big in these kinds of models. So it's really saying across the dyads influence one another. They cluster together in the way that people interact in the family. They become more similar to one another over time in the way this interaction occurs. Okay? So yes, there's something about a family effect. There's something about the dyads watching one another interact, learning from one another, and taking that on, okay? So the other thing, so that's one thing to think about, is that family effect. But the other thing that we see is about reciprocity. So when one person is is responsive to their partner, so is the other person back. So we see this building, which is particularly important with the younger children. We see these reciprocal effects that come to build that skill. So when you see that actor effect, when the kids are 7 years old, you see them taking this responsivity into all their relationships. It's come from the reciprocities that have occurred a few years earlier, okay? So that reciprocity is a building tool that I serve it to you, you serve it to me, we do this together, is a building tool for the kids then being able to be sensitive enough, an intrinsic sensitivity to other people, a trait sensitivity to other people. Okay, I think those are the worst and most methodologically complex slides I'm going to show you, and now it's easy sailing from here. Okay, so how much time have I got? Okay, so Alessandra, you can wave there, Alessandra, if you want. She may not be able to. Right? So Alessandra is now in Brasilia, in Brazil. Alessandra is one of our PhD flex cohorts, and she's just, she graduated a few weeks ago. And what she did was to take the scale and to adapt it for looking at parenting in Brazil. And she did a full validation and reliability, collecting up lots of dyads, talking to lots of mothers in order to find out about parenting in Brazil and how to adapt this scale. Okay, so, and she came out with good reliability, very good reliability and validity within the same context, that the kinds of things that I've already shown you about how it relates to children's cognitive functioning, how it relates to socioeconomics, etc. Okay. So we have this quick and dirty instrument, and quick and not dirty, says Mikhail, that can be used in Brazil. It's very quick, and we now we're bringing it into a program that is operating in Brazil already to try and help moms, kids, and fathers to learn this skill. So this is a picture of a meeting last week in Brazil with the, sorry, I'll just tell you, there's something called the Criança Feliz, which is a program, home visiting program for low-income families. And they are rolling it out to 4 million families with very young children to try and reduce the gap between the rich and the poor in Brazil, okay? This is supported strongly by the Minister of Social Development, and he was really the one with a group of people like Alessandra who came together with a vision about how to do this home visiting program. And then this is the president of Brazil who is endorsing it, who is saying this is what we need in order to reduce this gap between the rich and the poor. We need to improve children's early cognition, okay? So that program is running. It's a curriculum, it's a home visiting. They go to the homes, they talk to the moms during pregnancy and beyond in order to try and improve the outcomes of kids. And they talk about things like diet and nutrition, but as well as that, stimulation. And so that's then where we come in, is to think about how do we improve this business of shared thinking in the population. So we're developing a course for supervisors of Criança Feliz, and the goal of it is to teach supervisors about shared thinking and to teach methods that will help those supervisors coach the parents who are doing the shared thinking. One of the challenges of this is that the supervisors get trained. They then train the home visitors who then work with the moms. So that's how you get a program that's 4 million, that's going to service 4 million children. It's really through working with the supervisors and the cascade of delivery. So that's a wonderful model, except it's an exceptionally difficult model for us because you have to teach these different groups and hope that it gets through. Okay, so here's our task, and I'd really like people's thoughts and help with this. The previous training of this related skill, this sensitivity, responsivity, has involved filming mothers and reviewing films with a coach, and we have good evidence that that works. I mentioned to you the randomized control trials. It is so intensive and so expensive. So it's really too intensive to improve population health. You can't have a one-on-one coach because it's just too expensive at the level that it's been done before. So we're trying to find a way of teaching that skill much more cheaply than it's been taught. So the idea is that we're developing a web-based course. The web platform will serve as an ongoing resource for supervisors and home visitors. And the course that we're developing we plan to have 4 sessions, 2 hours per session. What are we going to do in it? So what we're going to do in it, Nina here has been working on drawing from, here I'll just, drawing from the literature on teaching adults. So there's training, of course, in social work, there's therapy training, there is training in medical school, students on this idea of empathy and getting into the mind of the other person. And so we're drawing on that to try to find out, how do you do this? How do you improve this? The kinds of things that we've come up with are things like watching and discussing with other supervisors. So a lot of discussion, tapes of high and low shared thinking. So we'll be playing tapes, they'll be analyzing the tapes, they'll be learning from the tapes and discussing them together. Exercises on what is another person thinking, what are children thinking, how do you read behaviors without sound, how do you cue into nonverbal behaviors. And then there's telling a story from another perspective. So I've lived with Keith Oatley, who writes and studies novels. And of course, I've had to learn something about perspective taking over 30 odd years. And so getting people to tell a story from another perspective, to read stories about people, all of those things about reading about other people's situations has been shown to develop empathy in the person. So you're really trying to find a way of walking in another person's shoes. And then there's a whole literature on building stimulation that is centered on play that we'll also be drawing on. Okay, so our goal then with these supervisors, I think we want to target very specifically and narrowly what we want to get them to think about. So where's the child looking? We want to teach them gaze. What is the child thinking? So as they're looking at gaze, then they're also talking about what is the child thinking? How do I add on to that? How do I build that? When I see the child looking at the truck, how do I talk about the colors? How do I talk about what the truck does? And then this business that I mentioned to you before about the turn taking, keep the conversation going. So where is the child's gaze? How do I build on it? How do we keep it going? And of course, like I've got, a whole group of educators in the room. You all know that what is central in the learning literature and the meta-analyses of how people learn, it's about capturing interest and expanding that interest once it's captured, right? So that's what our goal is watch what the child initiates and build on that. Okay. So just to summarize then, a measure for parents, siblings, and caregivers. We think about this family culture of shared thinking. It's a whole family process. It's a Vygotskian, Rogoff, whole family event where the culture that the child is inducted into is having a powerful influence on that learning, okay? We're trying to build a curriculum on shared thinking, and the idea of this curriculum is really that it's a population level teaching or curriculum that people would have access to. It's targeted to moms because they're the target in criança feliz, but in Brazil there are large families. There are many kids. Sometimes the father is there in the room when the home visitor is working with the mom. So we're hoping for this more general spread around the family environment. We absolutely expect small effect sizes, but I want to show you what that would look like at the population level. So if we just think about just a distribution that we've got, and what a small effect size is doing is just moving that a little bit to the right. That's all. But just look in a large population how many people that would have an impact on, even though it's a small effect size. So I think in a way that's what we're going for education purposes. We're trying to get everybody moving a little bit to the right. So I think that's about universal things. That's about what we're trying to teach the population. But I think there's something that we really have to pay attention to from the literature on early mental health and learning in kids. So what do we know to date about that? We really know that combination of genetic and risky environments are what predict negative outcomes in kids. And we know that it is specifically the more biologically vulnerable children. And those vulnerabilities come both through genetics and through the early uterine environment, exposures in the uterine environment. You know, low kids coming out premature, low birth weight, exposed to toxicities in utero. But these biologically vulnerable children are the ones who react more adversely to the quality of the environment, okay? Okay, so what is that, and I think that's really the sort of story of this whole risk and resilience area that's been going on for 20 years. Then what do we do about it? So there's a wonderful intervention that if you haven't read, it's by Green. It's a really important, I think, incredibly important intervention that it's come out a few places, but it's been in the Lancet, the most recent follow-up. So what it is about a prevention in siblings of autistic children in the development of autism themselves. So autism is a very strong genetic loading disorder. It has a high genetic loading. And so if you have an older sibling with autism, then you have, as a younger sibling, an increased likelihood of developing autism yourself, okay? So what did they do? They took the younger siblings of autistic children and they randomly assigned them to a parenting intervention that was going on when the kids were between 9 and 14 months, okay? And again, it was one of these very intensive ones with video feedback between the parents interacting with the kid. And the goal of it was to teach the parents to sensitively adapt to the child's own communication style. And we know that these children who are at risk of autism are showing less good communicative patterns, okay? They're harder for their parents to understand. And then there were 12 sessions of this video feedback, okay? It's an intensive intervention. But it then has again, it's a randomized control trial, and it has an effect on the infant attentiveness, an increase in the infant being able to pay attention to the cues of the caregiver. And it also has an effect on various symptoms that autistic children show. So they're more likely, if they've been in the intervention, they're more likely to respond to their name, to imitate, to do social reciprocity. Okay, now there are some things that it did not affect, absolutely. But I think this is a really interesting and really promising idea that here are these kids who are neurodevelopmentally vulnerable because of their genetics. Can we do something that has to do with parent-child interaction that just nudges them into a different direction? Okay, and I think that's what this particular study is about. Okay, so just I'm wrapping up then and just saying that two things. I think we need an open access curriculum, and that's really to try and help parents in those very early moments with little kids in order to become more responsive to them. And then I think we need something way more targeted than that. And that's for these kids who have got biological challenges, where their brains aren't developed, brains are developing atypically rather than typically because of either their genetics or exposures in utero. And that for those, we really need to identify and target those kids and help parents to really get better at reading these signals of the kids. So just in finishing, I just wanted to come back to Tomasello and this idea of the collective intentionality. So really long-term joint goals. It's about our cooperation with one another. How do we do that? Shared intentionality. And that society, culture, science are based on this shared thinking. And I think that Obama was, one of our heroes in being able to articulate some of these thoughts about this collective intentionality, the jointness of the effort that we have to engage in. If our democracy is to work in this increasingly diverse nation, each of us must try to heed advice of one of the great characters in American fiction who said, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. Politics is a battle of ideas. We'll prioritize different goals and the different means of reaching them. But without some common baseline, without a willingness to admit new information and concede that your opponent is making a fair point, we'll keep talking past each other, making common ground impossible. So that's what I leave you with.
I have so many questions. But I wonder if you could first just clarify, go back to your, I was kind of stuck when we were looking at your proportion of variance accounted for, and I understand the point you were making was around that kind of gradually increasing actor effect, the remaining family effect.
Yeah. Why is the dyad effect so big? Is
and
that
where's
what you're?
the error variance?
And the error variance is in the dyad.
Okay, that's what I was assuming.
Yeah.
And what happens when you take the dyad effect out?
So that's exactly what we want to do. So Katrina is absolutely right about these models that that when I'm interacting with her and Mikhail, in that dyad effect, there is also, because it's just measured in one situation, that's where the error of measurement is. It's in that part of the model. So the only way we can get rid of that is to do a few different tasks, and then we can say across those few different tasks that we really know how Jenny and Katrina do together. We really know how Mikhail and I do together. But we can't do that without these multiple tasks. So that's what we're working on right at the moment. Yeah.
And can I get one more in there?
Yeah.
So, let me see if I can conceptualize this. So I think that I think this is really fantastic and really exciting. And I really appreciate the kind of cognitive sensitivity and the back and forth and how it's associated with sort of some of the executive functioning cognitive language outcomes.
Right.
The other construct that I feel like is important is that affective hostility.
Yes.
And
I agree with you.
Okay, and so Be Gentle, one of the studies that really stuck with me is an old RCT, where what she did is she taught moms to come up with multiple explanations for why their child is behaving that way. That was the intervention.
Yes.
So it's partly a cognitive, it's an empathy building, but it's not getting the same construct. I think it's getting that.
I agree with you.
Hostilities, reflections. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I totally agree with you. I think in the 0 to 2 period, what the literature suggests is it's really about this responsivity stuff. But actually, as soon as the kids are mobile, you're starting to get this increase in the children's autonomy and an increase in the hostility of parents to children.
Right.
I know. And I agree with you. And I think, and that has really been picked up, I would say, by all the behavioral management programs that exist. And I think you need both of these. And I was worrying about that in Brazil as I was, when I was down there, because really we are totally focused, not me, but I'm just meaning home visiting programs in that first 2 years. They're totally focused on that whole business about stimulation responsiveness. They are not sufficiently focused on the business about behavior management with kids and decreasing that hostility and increasing positive behaviors. And I think we got to do it, and I think we have. But we're not going to put it in our curriculum because I think it's impossible to teach people. Like, it's difficult enough what we're setting out to do. I know.
Other options for the child's behavior.
I know.
It's not free of affect. So
It's not free
we're
of affect,
capturing whether it's a warm and positive interaction that they're having.
Yeah.
So I think and all the items cluster really highly together. So I think that if a parent was hostile, even if they'd
be low on this, yeah.
They'd still be low. So I think we're really divorced. I mean, we're not targeting hostility, but we haven't divorced it.
No, we haven't divorced it, but I do think there are different dynamics in families. I think there are these two sets of things that go on in mental health across the years, and they're absolutely overlapping. But I think as soon as you've got that hostility and that escalated hostility, you've got these patterns around reciprocal anger exchanges that escalate out of sight, as you know. You work on those, so
But okay, so that's really interesting. It's interesting to think about how they might go together. And I'm going to still lob out there. Maybe teach moms to come up with alternate explanations.
Right, for child behavior. Yeah. Alessandra, have you got that?
We'll remember.
Yeah.
A wonderful presentation. I'm wondering about, you're trying in Brazil to get to this target behavior with many families. How much have you thought about the balance between giving them information that will draw them to behavior and giving them support and training, and also helping them manage like the detractors, like all of the
I agree.
distractions and all of their own executive functioning and their own level of ability to attend. Like how much is getting to that target behavior?
Yeah.
Helping them manage.
You know, I think that's a great question. And let me just see if I just want to show you something that I think is really interesting in Brazil, if I can find it. The Gini index. So this index of how much people have economically with the differential across the society is extremely high in Brazil. So look at that. It's up over 50. It's really, really high. The USA is high, Canada, and then, you know, I just put in Sweden because it's, of course, the place that we all want to go and live for social policy. What?
Except for the weather.
Except for the weather. Well, ours is pretty bad, but you know, so I agree with you. And you think about what they're going through in Brazil at the moment. They're going through this terrible differential. They're going through very high levels of crime, probably as a consequence of that. They are implementing, solutions within slum communities of military and soldier, just to try and make people feel a little bit safer in that context. So they're trying to get at some of those larger social issues that I think are having a huge effect. And then domestic violence is very different. So when I was down there, I was hearing from people, this was not only in Brazil, this was across a number of different countries in South America, and they were just describing how in the culture there are much higher rates of domestic violence. So I agree with you. I don't know whether teaching them this little itsy bitsy piece about how to connect in that relationship when there's all this other stuff going on. That doesn't seem as potent to technology. Yeah, I'm sure that is in the people who have higher levels of income. Yeah, Jean.
That was a brilliant presentation. Keep sort of thinking of overlap with psychotherapy, because so many of the same variables are relevant to the work that we do, especially in terms of the relationship and responsiveness is very big now. So thinking of kind of beginning to define it in these terms actually is quite interesting. But building on the last person's comment, and I liked your observation that can we do it with teaching, but what about support groups for those mothers where they're actually experiencing this kind of attitude, interaction with each other and from someone else, could build their resilience somewhat to go back into
into what they're dealing with. And I really agree with you on that. I think some of the interventions now in developing countries that they've described in order to improve child outcomes are about getting moms together in villages. And I think that's terrific and that's great. And that is something certainly that we've talked about within the Criança Feliz, although it's only at this point a home visiting. I think what you're talking about is these small incremental steps. And so, but I totally agree with you. I think for moms, and particularly in rural areas, they're isolated. So that relational support, I think it probably is a very important augmenter to them being able to think inside their children. Yeah.
But also experiencing
the other
relationship.
Yeah.
Themselves is going to build.
Yes.
Wondering if that happens in therapy to some extent.
Yes.
Techniques we use, but is it that?
Yes, that's a great. Yeah.
Action that is in fact leading to changes.
That's a great idea because it's sort of talking about the same thing as those that family effect, right? It's saying if you're getting this same experience across all of these different relationships, you learn it better. Yeah.
I was thinking just to add to that too, when training with supervisors, really bringing that out, that experience, like that parallel process that you use for psychotherapy, right?
Yes.
So that they really get the experience of that kind of reciprocal experience.
Yes, of being listened to, of the person building on what, and that's exactly how we're trying. That's one of the, as it were, exercises that we're using, is that idea that they're in pairs, they're talking to one another, they're sharing, how do they respond? So we're trying to train it up at these different levels. Yeah, Rhonda.
It's been, I think this might be totally offline, just remembering a CDC thing where they did this experiment in Brandon, Manitoba, where they provided everyone with a base amount, like a set living amount.
Yeah.
And things, from what I understand,
Improved.
got way better. Would they ever think of having a subsample where they also increase, like,
Just income. That's transfer payments. I totally, and I totally agree with you. I think all of those things, there have been a number of randomized controlled trials on just giving people money, and they do improve things, and they improve parenting. They absolutely do. But you don't get far enough on that. But I agree with you. That should be the first thing. And then, the second thing is you try and do this twiddling around the relationships, but you give people money for, you make that possible for people to live without terrible levels of anxiety. But I don't know, Alessandra and I are putting a sort of small, and Mikhail and Nina are putting a small piece into this ongoing intervention. So, we don't really influence that. Yeah.
I was just thinking back to the person's comment about the supervisors who are going to go in.
Yeah.
No, the supervisors who are then teaching. And
The
then
home visitor.
The home visitors.
Right.
The home visitors, I'm just wondering who they might be.
Yes.
Questions, and having sort of that not be such a different, kind of group, or that there be a kind of pilot project to ensure that if there is a differential between, power differential, class differential, there's more equity, and if there would be a pilot project for those kids that aren't, to ensure that there isn't going to be one of just that it is more of a reciprocal, and eventually, once you do get to the home visitor, that those home visitors become the trainers. And I'm thinking like peer support groups, where there's so much evidence.
Oh, I see what you mean. That's a nice idea.
Young adolescents. Yes. So much more.
Yes, that's a nice idea. I like that a lot. That they've trained, they've worked, they've got good at it, and then they graduate to that level. So the education level of these, in the way that it's been set up in Criança Feliz, are university graduates. The supervisors are university graduates, and these are high school graduates. The home visitors are high school graduates. And these would all be low-income families. But no, I really like that idea that once they've got trained, that they could train. I think that's right.
It kind of reminds me of Sugata Mitra's School in the Clouds. Have you heard of that?
No.
And I think there's a movie based on his research, Slumdog Millionaire.
Oh
He puts the camera into I think it was in Calcutta or something like that, and then they kind of teach themselves. And I'm kind of getting like a vibe, you could build off of a model like that, where because you're just kind of throwing one piece in. I'm really thinking about with the things, like for example with the cultural conditions in Brazil, to have a piece that you can't expect or be prepared for everything that is happening over there.
Yeah.
And so something like that would almost, you know, have a way of letting the culture and the people working there
Yeah.
be able to already be prepared for that.
Yes.
That you wouldn't necessarily
Yes.
be aware of. So,
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
No, I think what a few people have said, and I completely agree with you, is these, you know, these empirically supported interventions are really depend when they're moved and scaled up in another culture. They really depend on that environment. So I really agree with you. It's sort of somehow you want to teach a little bit of this, but then you want to get it taken up in a culturally integrated way. Yeah, so I really agree with you. Yeah, I don't totally know how to do it, you know, but yeah, I agree with you. I think we're done.
We have
Oh.